On the phone, we have a gentleman who I remember playing quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals back in the late 70s, early 80s. I watched him that Super Bowl against the 49ers. Elliott remembers him back in college. Well, Elliott's a little older than me. Ken Anderson. How you doing today, Ken?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Great. I see that you grew up, in Batavia?
Yeah, not too far west of Chicago. In fact, I guess my claim to fame is my next door neighbor through the backyards was Dan Issel, who was an All-American basketball player at Kentucky and now in the NBA Hall of Fame.
So Issel was the second best athlete to come out of Batavia.
Well, I think we'll rank him number one because he's in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
There was also another famous person from that area. There was a Miss USA at that time, I think.
That may have been, I don't know, that may have been after me there. You got me on that one. She certainly wasn't in school when I was there.
You would have noticed.
Yes.
Batavia is not exactly a hotbed of football, but even with that in mind, how did you end up at Augustana and not a large school?
Well, when I was coming out of high school, I was about maybe 6'1" and weighed about 170 pounds and was probably a better basketball and baseball player than I was a football player. So I was actually going to Augustana to play basketball and baseball. And that summer, my high school football coach talked me into writing a letter to the football coach at Augie and to see if I could try out. And, a lot of times, at least at that point in time, at Division III schools, they take warm bodies to fill out the roster. So they let me try out, and by the second or third game of the year, I was the starting quarterback on the varsity.
Did Big Ten schools not come after you, or?
No, I was just too small, and I didn't have a great high school football career. A few teams had looked at me, and I probably could have gone to other schools. The size of Augustana, Milliken down in Decatur, and McMurray down in the southern part of the state, but nothing bigger than that.
Okay.
When did you realize that you were good enough to play in the NFL?
Well, I think after my sophomore year, scouts started coming by, and certainly the spring of my going into my senior year, a lot of scouts, came by and worked me out. There was no combine in those days, and as I recall, just about every team in the NFL came to watch me play in person. The one that did not was the closest one, and that was the Bears.
That's because the Bears had that great quarterback, Bobby Douglas, back then.
Well, I guess they didn't need me. But anyway, it was kind of, Jack Brickhouse, one of the great announcers of all time, his daughter was in my class. And so she would drag him out for homecoming every year, and he would go back and tell the Bears, I may not know what I'm talking about, but I think there's this kid at Augustana that might be able to play quarterback.
You might have been able to help out the Bears. Just a little bit.
Well, I think everybody at that point, would love to play for your hometown team, and I grew up with the Bears, and the days of Billy Wade and Rudy Bukic and those guys, and watching Dale Sayers score 6 touchdowns in the mud at Wrigley Field against the 49ers. But the best thing that ever happened to me was going to Cincinnati and getting to play for, Paul Brown as my head coach, and probably the biggest advantage was Bill Walsh was my first coach.
Yeah. Leading up to the NFL draft, did you have an idea how high you would go and what team was interested in you?
Well, at that point in time, I think everybody thought that Dallas was the team because they sent out more information than anybody else. But I really didn't know. I didn't know if I'd get drafted. I thought I would get a chance to go with some team to a camp, but then the Bengals liked me, and their gauge on me is once Lynn Dickey went. He was out of Kansas State at the time, and once he went, then they thought it was time to take me, and luckily they did, because I think Atlanta with the next pick was going to take me. So going to Cincinnati was perfect for me.
What was it like, your first training camp with the Bengals?
Well, it was it was eye-opening. The players that you're playing against are bigger and faster, but then you quickly realize the players I'm playing with on offense are bigger and faster. And the one advantage that I had is we didn't have a large number of players in camp. In fact, we started off, we only had two quarterbacks, Virgil Carter, who was the starter, and myself. So I liked my chances of making the team at that point. And we had the advantage in those days that, training camp, I reported my first camp, I think, July 7th. And we were in Wilmington, Ohio till the middle of September. And we played 6 preseason games. So there were a lot more practice opportunities, a lot more game opportunities for a young guy. And, I felt I had a lot of work to do, but I felt I had a chance to play in the league.
Now, 1971 was a pretty good year for quarterbacks. Jim Plunkett went first, Archie Manning went second, Dan Pastorini went third, and then no quarterbacks until round 3, where, as you said, Lynn Dickey got drafted ahead of you.
And then Joe Theismann went in the 7th round that year.
Right. Despite all the publicity machine that Notre Dame may have been able to crank out for his career, a guy from Augustana ends up with that. I would assume you go into Cincinnati with not the buildup that a Plunkett or some of these other guys had who were drafted ahead of you.
Well, I think a lot of the media in Cincinnati didn't even know where Augustana was. Taking this no-name kid in the 3rd round from a Division III school, but I think Bill Walsh had a plan. I mean, by that time I was 6'2", 215, which was about the prototype size for a quarterback in the NFL in those days. I was pretty mobile, and he could literally. I was more of an option running quarterback in college, and literally, the draft in those days was in January, and so I moved to Cincinnati the first week of February, and he and I started working out, and we literally started walking through footwork, 3, 5, 7-step drops, so moving your feet. The next week, you're at a jog, and then you're 3/4. I mean, it was a month before I'm even attempting to do anything full speed, but he could kind of break me down and mold me to the kind of quarterback he wanted me to be.
Did you see the true genius of Bill Walsh back then?
Oh, no question about it. Just with his offensive schemes, I think what he was known for is just, how the quarterback's footwork and the timing and the depth of the routes and the steps of the receivers all tied together. How, I think a lot of the West Coast offense started because, they didn't have a great running game, and using your running backs in the passing game became an extension of the running game. And so not only was the whole field used vertically, the whole field was used horizontally.
Did you see the genius of Paul Brown, who drafted an offensive tackle and an offensive guard ahead of you in 71?
Well, Paul had a great eye for talent, and he was not heavily involved in the game planning in those days. He left that to the assistants. He was, very involved in on-game decisions, but he had a great eye for talent, and I think one of the great eyes he had is when, a good player's days were behind him. And it's always tough to let players go, but he kind of knew when you were at the end. But like I said, I think, one of he was such an innovator. I mean, it's well documented what he did, brought to the NFL. I think to a certain extent, the way NFL teams operate today are because of the way Paul Brown started doing it back in the old Cleveland Brown days.
Yeah, you talk about letting players go. I'm looking at the 1971 Bengals roster, and it looked like a pretty young team. There's, a guy here, a guy there that might have been, 6 years older than you, but the overwhelming majority are within a couple, 3 years of you. Did that make the process, the transition, simpler?
Well, and I think one of the things that made it easier is, being able to move to Cincinnati in February. So before you go to training camp, I had been through the installation process twice as far as the offense was concerned. we had a lot of players that lived in town. You got to know them before, you went to training camp. And geez, in 71, that was only the fourth year removed from expansion for the Bengals, who came into existence in 68. So, when in those days you got kind of the leftovers of the league. And so for those first 3 years, there was a lot of transition of players just because of the expansion.
When did the Bengals turn the corner to become a playoff contender?
Well, I think, in 72 was my first year as a starter. But I really think, in 73, we were a playoff team. And, we got Isaac Curtis that year, who was a tremendous, one of the great wide receivers of all time. He was a football player that was a world-class sprinter rather than being a world-class sprinter who tried to play football. And that really opened things up for us. We had a pretty explosive offense. And, that year, I think we might have won the division that year over Pittsburgh.
Was your main strength your accuracy or arm strength, or how would you assess yourself?
Well, I kind of get labeled sometimes a dink and dunk quarterback. I think I used everybody. I think if you go back and you look at my yards per attempt, it's right there with Dan Marino and some of those guys. I don't think you would classify them as dink and dunk quarterbacks. I had the arm to make any throw in the league, and I was fortunate to be pretty mobile at that time as well.
Probably one of your best games was that 75 Monday Night Football game against the Bills.
Yeah, that was, I believe, the first Monday night game in Cincinnati. And, they came in with O.J. Simpson in his prime, and it's the best game I ever had, at least yardage-wise. I think I threw for 450, something like that, and O.J. ran for almost 200. There was not a lot of defense in that game, and we managed to win it.
Yeah. 75 season, 11-3 record for the Bengals, the most victories in team history at that point. Could you tell that you had a team that was going to do special things?
Yeah, and we had really developed, and we had a pretty good year in 74 and 75. 11-3, but we were the wild card. I think during that period of years we happened to be stuck in the same division with Pittsburgh, who was one of the great teams of all times, one of the great defenses of all times. But for most years we managed to hold our own against them, and like I said, we felt we were a pretty good team that could play with anybody that year.
Were the Steelers the toughest defense you had to go up against during the 70s?
Oh, no question. I mean, you look at the number of Hall of Famers that they had on that defense. And of course, when you're talking about on the other side with Bradshaw and Swan and Stallworth, and they had a lot of weapons over there. And, that we had some great battles with them. And, it was kind of fun because at the end of my coaching career, I got to spend 3 years coaching in Pittsburgh and renewed a lot of those friendships.
Yeah. I do believe you had a game against the Steelers where you went 20 of 22.
Yeah.
So they couldn't have been that tough, right?
Well, it was. I think, it was just we were patient that game. They were, they played a lot of, cover two, and they could get to the quarterback with a 4-man rush, and we took what the defense gave them and won in a tight one. But I think the thing I remember most about that game is late in the game we were going in, and it's somewhere around the 20-yard line, and our running back went up the middle and was tackled and rolled over, put the ball on the ground, and thought the play was over, but for some reason no whistle had blown, and Mike Wagner, their safety, picked it up and started running, and I chased him down. They ended up not scoring on that drive, and we held on to win.
So Mel Blount didn't give you any problems in that game?
Well, Mel Blount, what a cornerback he was. I mean, one of the first, big corners that there were, and in fact, that's why the 5-yard chuck rule ended up coming into being, because he was so big and physical, you couldn't get off the line against him. And So, we had to face him twice a year, and I think Paul Brown happened to be on the competition committee at that time, and that may have had some influence.
Yeah. I think they ended up calling it the Isaac Curtis rule, right?
No, that's it. Well, that would probably be a good name for it.
But your cornerback on your team wasn't too shabby either in Ken Riley.
Kenny was, was a quarterback at Florida A&M and came and became a defensive back, and sometimes I think he got overshadowed a little bit. We had a real good cornerback on the other side named Lamar Parrish, who happened to be a little bit more flashy than Kenny was, but he was just steady and then played, I think, 15 years in the league and had more interceptions than anybody in Bengals history, and just one of the great guys and one of the solid players ever to play cornerback. And I think there's a guy that should get some Hall of Fame recognition.
Yeah. How tough was it ending that 75 season with the 31-28 loss to Oakland?
Well, it was tough, and they got off to an early lead, and we kept coming back. And I remember going down, and we had come back, and we're going down. We got a chance to win the game, and it was a fourth down, and I can still see Chip Myers coming over the middle, and unfortunately, Ted Hendricks got a sack, I believe, on that play. But I think the tough thing is after that game, that's when Paul Brown retired. And, Bill Walsh left and went to San Diego from there.
How did Bill Walsh not end up getting the job as the head coach? I never got that.
Well, I don't know. What people don't remember is Bill Johnson was our line coach, was a great player with the San Francisco 49ers, was a center, was on, all half-century teams, and was an excellent football coach. And to be quite honest with you, I thought at that point in time, I agreed with the decision. As much as I hated to lose Bill Walsh, I thought, Tiger Johnson was probably more ready at that point in time to become a head coach.
At one point, you had an Ohio State backfield with Archie Griffin and Pete Johnson. Did you say to yourself, I'm glad I didn't play at Ohio State because all I ever would have done was hand off to those two guys?
Well, in the Woody Hayes era, I'd love to play for Urban Meyer, like he does. But that was, the 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and, with Woody's philosophy that, when you throw, three things can happen, and two of them are bad, and we're just not going to do it. But, I think one of the big weapons, and, Archie was more of a role player with us, but, Pete was our fullback. And, and those offenses of Paul Brown in those days, the fullback was the main ball carrier, and Pete was a 1,000-yard rusher.
Was there any concern when Forrest Gray became head coach that he would try to use that Packers system with the two running backs and just keep running the ball?
Well, I think one of the things, Forrest was a great coach and just what we needed. We had, in the late 70s, we were not a very good football team, and we needed somebody tough, somebody to install discipline, and Forrest was certainly that guy. But I think one of the big attributes was that his offensive coordinator was Lindy Infante, and Lindy was a great offensive football coach, and we were one of the first ones to run what is now the nakeds and the bootlegs, and I think our Super Bowl year was about my 10th year in the league, and I think, I was the second leading rusher on the team because of that. We had started, installing an option game, and Danny Ross was the perfect tight end, to run that when he's running off a technique, and he and I were on the same page, and, we kind of run the little smash routes on the outside, and it's kind of inside, outside, high, low, and, Lindy brought a lot of innovations to the game for us.
What was that 81 season like when you guys went to the Super Bowl? Did you know in training camp that you could be something of that caliber?
Well, I think we knew we could be a pretty good football team. And I think we started to believe that at the end of the 80 season, Forrest's first year, we started to play better. And then, my replacement had already been drafted that year, Jack Thompson out of Washington. And or Washington, I think it was Washington, the throwing Samoan, And, the Super Bowl year started off, and we were playing Seattle on opening day, and I threw 3 picks in the first quarter and got benched. Jack had a sprained ankle, and they brought in our third guy, Turk Schonert, and brought us back to win. And, some doubts whether I would play anymore. And then we're going the next week and had to play the Jets in New York. And that's when they had the sack exchange with, Gastineau and Klecko and Lyons and Abdul Salam and those guys. And I didn't know if I wanted to play against them anyway. But, we managed to win that one and, started off, I think, maybe 2-2. But, what we really caught fire is, we had 5 games in November against all playoff teams and literally, kind of handled all 5 of them to put us in position to go into the playoffs.
Is it true that you had to lobby Forrest Gregg to start?
Well, that week we had talked a lot about a lot of scenarios. Is it better if I start? Is it better if I come off the bench? And so he said, before Wednesday's practice, he says, come on into my office early. And, we came in and we started the discussion. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to start. He said, okay, you start. So it became a pretty easy decision.
Oh.
You were named Comeback Player of the Year and MVP that year, but your 1980 season wasn't that horrendous where you should have been a Comeback Player of the Year.
Well, I think that's a year I had a little bit of a knee injury that I played with and kind of, struggled through it a lot. But, luckily in 81, Lindy, I can't give him enough credit. I had gotten into some bad habits and, we really, kind of took an off season and went back to square one and went back to fundamentals and I got to playing some pretty good football again.
Game you probably didn't want to play in was that Freezer Bowl against the Chargers.
You can't believe how cold that was that day. And, the story that I tell most about that is I'm glad there was no ESPN and all those sports networks in those days because it was in the first quarter and we'd never, I think there was only one set of heated benches in the league and they brought them in. And so I'm sitting over there on the sidelines and luckily I've got my helmet on, but I'm sitting on my hands and they've got those little slots that your feet can go into and there's a roar of the crowd and I stand up to see if there's a turnover if I'm going back on and my feet don't come out. And I go down and I couldn't get my hands in front of me. And the first thing that hit was my face mask and I'm seeing stars. And I called the trainer over for some ammonia tablets. I said, I can't get knocked out of this game falling off the bench.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about it being cold. It was only 9 below, a wind chill of what, minus 59? You say to yourself, gee, where's a dome stadium when I need one?
Well, and it was so cold. I remember Forrest Gregg's pregame talk was, he said, man, I played in a game like this, years ago when I was with the Packers, and he said, it's a lot like going to the dentist. You know it's going to hurt, but you got to go anyway.
Well, at least the Super Bowl was indoors.
Yeah, I tried to put that one out of my mind, and, it was, we went into that game and I had 2 interceptions and we had 3 fumbles and you can't expect to win a game like that if you're going to have, 5 turnovers. And San Francisco was a great football team. And, we moved the ball a lot, but we tended to stub our own toes and you can't win it when you're going to turn the ball over.
Yeah, but down 20-0 at halftime and final score being 26-21. You have to say to yourself, we showed, if nothing else, we certainly deserve to be on the same field with that team.
Well, yeah, and, like I say, it's, the opening kickoff, they fumbled, we got it, good field position, made a couple of first downs, and then it's 3rd and goal on the 5, and I throw an interception, we get no points. In the second quarter, I hit Chris Collinsworth, we got a first down inside the 20, we're going to get points out of that, he fumbles it, and then we fumbled, 2 kickoffs, right before half that led to 6 points for them. And then still, all in all, we had, they had a goal line stand and we couldn't put it in from the 2-yard lines in 4 tries. And, so you go back and, woulda, shoulda, coulda, and the end result is we still got beat.
That 82 season, when you completed 70% of your passes, do you think that was your best season as a quarterback?
Well, I don't know. That was it was a strike year. We only played 9 games, but we were 7-2 that year, and I thought for sure we're going back to the Super Bowl, and we were as good as anybody, and unfortunately we ran into a pretty hot Jets team in the first round of the playoffs, and I think Freeman McNeil ran for 200 and threw for a touchdown pass, and we didn't survive, and you realize at that point it's awful tough to get there.
Did you have a favorite receiver to throw to?
Oh gosh, I had a lot of them. Early in my career, Chip Myers was a big receiver, kind of took me under his wing. We had Bob Trumpy as our tight end in those years, and they've got all the pass catching tight ends nowadays. And I said, Trumpy was that guy before any of these guys back in the early '70s. He was 6'4", 6'5", could really run, was an outstanding weapon, and then Isaac Curtis comes, and people forget for a while for about 2 or 3 years we had Isaac Curtis and Charlie Joyner both. We got him in a trade from Houston, and ultimately let him go in a trade to San Diego. But that was a great tandem of receivers, and then all of a sudden in the '80s, Collinsworth comes in, and we got Danny Ross as a tight end, and so I was really lucky to play with a lot of good guys.
I read where Paul Brown thought quite highly of Isaac Curtis because he said Isaac had a quiet confidence. He wasn't one of these guys who showboated and spiked the ball and all this other stuff. Is that pretty much who Isaac Curtis was on the field?
Yeah, no question about it. And we knew from the first practice that Isaac was special. And he kind of, I don't want to say he got special treatment, but he's the only guy I know in training camp that he come out and he said, I think my hamstring's tight. And Paul Brown said, well, you better take the day off then. Anybody else, you think it's tight. But Isaac, we didn't want to take any chances with him. We needed him on the field.
How did you know when it was time to call it a career?
Well, I don't think you ever do. At the end of my career, I was backing up Boomer, and I went into a game in Houston, and he wasn't playing well, and Sam White put me in, and we went down and scored a couple touchdowns, and then I'm running away from a blitz and hurt my shoulder, and so I'm going into my 17th year, and I worked out really hard in the off season, and we came to mini camp, and Sam had White had said, "Geez, how you feel, Kenny? And how's you doing your physical?" I said, "Geez, I've really worked out hard this off season, Coach. I'm ready to go." And he said, "Well, guess again." And my back had been bothering me and my shoulder, and we went in and kind of determined that I was done. And I fought it for a while, and then you come to the realization that they were right, and physically I was just done playing.
How did you end up in the radio booth?
Well, I always wanted to coach, and everybody kind of says, geez, you don't want to do that. All the hours that a coach work, you're just being stupid, and I didn't want to be stupid, and so geez, they hired me for a local radio and television station. Ended up doing the Bengals game with Dave Lapham, who was my roommate for about 10 years, and really enjoyed doing that, and started doing a little TV work, and after 6 years of that, kind of kept going back. I realized I probably wasn't real good in that business, and I always wanted to coach, and Dave Shootle was the head coach of the Bengals and gave me an opportunity.
Did you ever think to yourself that, I want to be a head coach?
Well, I think that's, always something that you would like to do, and I coached in Cincinnati for 10 years, and we didn't have a lot of great teams, and I when you look at who gets head coaching opportunities, they come from teams that are winning. But I had a great mentor in my coaching, Tom Moore, who's still coaching, the assistant head coach, out with the Arizona Cardinals. But he and I became great friends over the years. Was a big coaching mentor of mine, and he always told me, he says, Kenny, there's nothing wrong with being a good assistant coach. And I can always believe that if you work hard and you do your job, things will take care of themselves.
I know the pensions are better for assistant coaches than the former players.
What's that?
The pensions are better for the former coaches than for the players.
That's why I could retire when I did, because of the coach's pension. No, it was, I had 17 great years of coaching and 17 wonderful years of playing and 6 years of covering football as a broadcaster. And, it was time to kind of slow down and chase around grandkids.
I think there's a certain irony that a guy who is so identified as a Cincinnati Bengal picks up a Super Bowl ring with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Well, I think a lot of people in Cincinnati had a tough time with that, and I said, I'm not the one that wanted to leave Cincinnati, and they brought in Marvin Lewis, who's done a great job in Cincinnati, and every coach wants to bring in his own staff, and so I was let go, and I spent 4 years down in Jacksonville, and at the end I was one of 19 assistant coaches that Jack Del Rio fired, and I needed a job. And, the Pittsburgh Steelers and Coach Tomlin gave me one and had 3 great years up there. It really, my wife and I enjoyed our stay up there and had a chance to win a Super Bowl. And I still remember getting back to the team hotel that night and went into the bar and kind of waiting for all my family to get back from the game. And Lynn Swann comes up and puts his arms around me and says, Kenny, you finally got a Super Bowl ring, but you had to come to Pittsburgh to get it.
And it helped, too, that your mentoring made Ben Roethlisberger the great quarterback that he is.
Well, I don't think I had a lot to do with that. Ben is a tremendous player. And, he kind of gets, the notoriety. Geez, he can't, he's so big you can't get him down. He makes great plays, outside the pocket. And he can tear you up inside the pocket as well. This guy, had it all, and I think I rode his coattails more than I helped him out.
How is it that the Bengals never retired your number and Andy Dalton's wearing it these days?
Well, I think, the Bengals have retired one number, and that was their first number 1 draft choice, Bob Johnson, number 54, who's still a great friend of mine, was my center for a lot of years. And I think the league had discouraged teams from retiring numbers, and so they never did. And when they were going to draft Andy, I got a call from the draft room, and they wanted to know if it would be okay with me if they gave Dalton number 14. And what are you going to say? And so my comment was to them, he can have number 14, but he better play good. and so far he's played pretty good.
How hard is it being a finalist for the Hall of Fame and not getting in?
Well, I think the first time when I was eligible and got down to the final 15, it was disappointing, and then after that, quite honestly, I don't think about it. I really am proud of the career that I've had, and now that I've retired, I get to spend a little bit more time back in Cincinnati, and I get to see former teammates a lot more, and I just enjoy being around those guys. And, we've got one Hall of Famer, and, certainly turned my career around in the age when we drafted Anthony Munoz to play left tackle. But just to be around those guys and to reminisce and tell stories. And, the one nice thing is the farther you get away from playing, your memory gets a little bit, well, I don't want to say clouded, but you only remember the good times, and sometimes you embellish those, and you're probably a little bit better player than you really were.
Well, that always helps, especially for the people that never saw you play.
Yeah. Well, when I go out to talk, the title of my talk is My Career as I Remember It. I make no attempt to get dates, facts, or statistics correct.
Do you think to yourself, if you would have went nationally or broadcasting, you'd probably get in? Because it seems like nowadays the people who are getting in are the ESPN, NFL Network, CBS, NBC guys. I mean, they pump these guys up like a Kurt Warner is a finalist this year. But again, your stats are better than Kurt Warner's.
Well, I don't know. It's so hard to go by stats because of the era, that I played in. What they call it up until '79 was the dead ball era. You know, when offensive linemen, you know, could not extend their arms, they had to keep their hands within the framework of their body. Pass protection was tough. You didn't throw the ball as much. You only played 14 games. And now it's a much more wide open game. And, you know, and we were a small market team, and, you know, there was, you know, no ESPN. And, you know, I remember Monday Night Football was such a big deal because that was the first time you saw highlights from other games around the country. I mean, you know, it wasn't like you go home Sunday night and you're catching the league highlights. There were no highlights till Monday Night Football. So I don't think as many people, you know, got a chance to see me play. You know, I don't even know who the voters are now and whether they're old enough to have seen me play. And so, like I say, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. I'm more concerned about helping my little grandson, you know, hit a baseball, hit a golf ball, and dressing up my little granddaughter in her gowns.
How did the Ken Anderson Foundation come about?
Well, you know, I've got, my wife and I have a nephew who's severely autistic, and, you know, had some behavioral issues, and it just, he could get violent at times, and his parents realized he could no longer live at home. And he went to a facility, and we always say it was bare bones. You know, it was about 8 cabins with 10, 12 boys in each cabin, and he did well in that environment. But he turned 22, and he had to go into a group home, and sometimes the options there aren't what you'd like them to be. And so we started our foundation to build a community for adults with autism and other developmental disabilities. You know, as we say, a place where they can live, work, and play, and it'll be a totally, you know, integrated community, and that there will be other homes for people without developmental disabilities as well. So we keep plugging away with that goal. We've been on our own for just about a year now, and things are progressing. We have our own 501c3 status, and so we are a charitable foundation, and we keep plugging away. And you know, we hope to make a difference in the lives of those with developmental disabilities, and to let them live their life as best as they can, as independent as they can.
It seems like the Cincinnati athletes tend to stay in the community and do a lot for the community. Yourself, like you said, Anthony Munoz is active in the community. Even though Boomer's living in New York, it seems like he does a lot in Cincinnati also.
Well, you know, Cincinnati is home to a lot of us, and you're right. A lot of guys have made Cincinnati their home. I didn't want to be cold anymore and shovel snow, so I'm down in Hilton Head, South Carolina. But we get, you know, because of the foundation, because of grandkids, we get back once a month. And, you know, and Cincinnati has been a wonderful community, you know, for me. You know, we still call it home. And like I say, and so to be able to do a project like this in Cincinnati means a lot to us.
I think you go every month to go to Montgomery Inn for the ribs.
Well, you know, that's a must stop. You know, you got to do there, and you got to do Skyline Chili whenever you get back. So,
Does it help being the former? Does it help being the former Bengal quarterback? You don't have to wait in line when you go for Skyline Chili or to Montgomery Inn.
Well, you know, if you've seen me lately, I look nothing like the guy that played football, so nobody knows who the heck I am.
Well, you need to walk around in a Ken Anderson jersey and a helmet on.
I saved that for the grandkids. You know, they've all got small jerseys, and it was kind of funny because my mother and father passed away years ago, but my sister was kind of cleaning up some stuff that she had in her garage, and had a couple old helmets of mine. So one grandson got one, and one grandson got the other. So they're well taken care of.
Do they have an appreciation for who Ken Anderson, the football player, was, as opposed to Grandpa?
Well, no, because the two oldest ones are 3, and then I've got one grandson that's a year old, and my other little granddaughter is 7 months old now. So, but they will know. They got enough stuff around.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Well, it's always a pleasure. You know, it kind of feels, talking with you guys that I'm back home in Batavia a little bit. I appreciate the opportunity.